Alright, welcome back, my brothers and sisters. It is 2/11/2013, 9:36 p.m. And it's... Alright. He claimed that Israel and Mount Zion represented the church, that the promised submission of the Gentiles to the Jews. This is part two of Pre-Millennialism. Okay, gotta go back down here. He claimed that Israel and Mount Zion represented the church, that the promised submission of the Gentiles to the Jews was simply prophetic to the conversion of the Gentiles and their entrance into the church, that the lying down of the lion and the lamb together typified the reconciliation of the old and new natures, and that the establishment of an outward invisible kingdom at Jerusalem, over which Christ and the saints would reign, was gross and carnal and contrary to season, and it implied that mingling together of human and spiritual beings on the earth. His new hypothesis was that by the preaching of the gospel, Mohammedanism would be overthrown, the Jews converted, the papal church with the Pope, Antichrist would be destroyed, and there would follow 1,000 years of righteousness and peace known as the millennium, at the close of which there would be a short period of apostasy, ending in the return of Christ. There would then be a general resurrection of the dead, followed by a general judgment. The earth would be destroyed by fire, and eternity would begin. The times were favorable for the new theory. A reaction had set in from the open infidelity of those days. All England was in religious fever. The Great Awakening followed under Whitefield and Wesley, and it looked as Whitby claimed that the millennium was about to be ushered in, that he was mistaken. The events of history since the time have shown. It is evident that we are not in the millennium now. Nevertheless, theory was favorably received everywhere and spread with great rapidity, and became an established doctrine of the church, and is what is known today as the post-millennial view of the second coming of Christ, and supposed to be the orthodox faith of the church. In short, post-millennialism, as advocated in our day, is barely 200 years old, while pre-millennialism dates back to the days of Isaiah and Daniel. The sad thing is that this false doctrine of post-millennialism is taught in our Bibles by the headings of the chapters in the Old Testament. For illustration, the heading of chapters 43 and 4 of Isaiah read, "The Lord comforteth the church with his promises," whereas the chapters are not addressed to the church at all, but to Jacob and Israel, as we see by reading them. The ordinary reader overlooks the fact that the chapter headings of the Bible are put there by the publisher and should be omitted, as they are misleading. As for illustrated, the title to the books of Revelation, which is called The Revelation of St. John the Divine, whereas it should be called The Revelation of Jesus Christ, Revelation 1:1. Premillennialists are divided into three different schools of interpretation, which are fundamentally antagonistic Gnostic known as the Preterist, Historical, and Futurist schools. The Preterist schools originated with the Jesuits, Jesuit, Alcazar. His view was first put forth as a complete scheme in his work on the Apocalypse, published in AD 1614. It limits the scope of the apocalypse to the events of the Apostle John's life and affirms that the whole prophecies were fulfilled in the destruction of Jerusalem by Titus and the subsequent fall of the persecution Roman Empire, thus making the Emperor Nero the Antichrist. The purpose of the scheme was transparent. It was to relieve the papal church from the stigma of being called the harlot church and the pope from being called the Antichrist. It is the view that is now but little advocate. The historical school, sometimes spoke of as the presentist scheme, interprets the apocalypse as a series of prophecies predicting the events that were to happen in the world and in the church from John's day to the end of time. The advocates of this school interpret the symbols of the book of Revelation as referring to certain historical events that have and are happening in the world. They claim that the Antichrist is a system rather than a person and is represented by the harlot church of Rome. They interpret the time limit in the book of the year-day scale. This school has had some very able and ingenious advocates. This view, like the preceding, was unknown to the early church. It appeared about the middle of the 12th century and was systemized at the beginning of the 13th century by the abbot Joachim. Subsequently, it was adopted and applied to the Pope by the forerunners and leaders of the Reformation and may be said to have reached its zenith in Mr. Ellicott's Horae Apocalyptica. It is frequently called the Protestant interpretation because it regards popery as exhausting all that has been predicted of the anti-Christian power. It was a powerful and formidable weapon in the hands of the leaders of the Reformation, and the conviction of its truthfulness nerved them to love not their lives unto the death. It was the secret of the martyr heroism of the 16th century. The Futurist school interprets the language of the apocalyptic literally, accepts such symbols as are names as such, and holds that the whole of the book from the end of the 13th chapter is yet future and unfulfilled, and the greater part of the book from the beginning of chapter 6 to the end of chapter 19 describes what shall come to pass during the last week of Daniel's 70th weeks. This view, while its date is modern times, only from the close of the 16th century, is really the most ancient of the three. It was held in many of its prominent features by the primitive fathers of the Church, and is one of the early interpretations of Scripture's truth that sunk into oblivion with the growth of the papacy, and that has been restored to the Church in these last times. In its present form, it may be said to have originated at the end of the 16th century with the Jesuits Ribera, who, actuated by the same motive as the Jehuzit's Alcazar sought to rid the papacy of the stigma of being called the Antichrist, and so referred the prophecies of the apocalypse to the distant future. This view was accepted by the Roman Catholic Church and was for a long time confined to it. But, strange to say, it has wonderfully revived since the beginning of the 19th century, and that among Protestants is it is the most largely accepted of the three views. It has been charged with ignoring the papal and Mohammed system, but this is far from the truth, for it looks upon them as foreshadowed in the scriptures, and it sees in them the type of those great antitypes. Yet future the beast and the false prophet and the futurist interpretations of the scripture is the one employed in this book. The second and pre-millennial coming of Christ is the key to the scriptures. All of these prophetical writings make it their terminal end. This is a dark world, and the sure word of prophecy is given as a light to show us the way over the stormy seas of time. 2 Peter, 1st chapter, verse 19. Prophecy is not a haphazard guess like our weather probabilities. It is history written in advance. The moment we grasp this ideal of prophecy and clearly see the relation of Christ's premillennial coming to Scripture truth, the Bible becomes a new book, and doctrinal and prophetical truths at once fall into their proper place, and our theological system is no longer a chaos but an orderly plan. John 14:29, and now I have told you before it comes to pass, that when it comes to pass, ye might believe. And that is it for premillennialism. And I will be back after I load this onto YouTube. So, peace be with you, my brothers and sisters. I love you.